This video will provide an in-depth walkthrough of these three activity features that are available on the native browser storage listener. Now, this listener allows you to identify browser storage, either cookies, local storage, or session storage, and allows you to target that so that the listener will actually listen for activity within those browser storage elements and will push that information into the data layer. So once you enable these, the first step will be to jump to event settings and notice that there are three out-of-the-box events. These are the data layer events that are going to be pushed into the data layer when activity occurs in browser storage that you have targeted. Down here is where you set the actual targeted information. So if you wanted to target, for example, maybe one of the Google Analytics IDs that's stored, you might target a cookie named _GA. And you might say that it simply contains a single value, and you want to push that into the data layer only when it's set or when the value changes. We're going to run with the examples that we already have built out here. We have a native application on our website that sets a visitor ID or a user ID. And what we'd like to do as a marketer is know when that user ID is set, put it, have it pushed into the data layer so we can do something with it. In addition to that, we are setting a timestamp the first time we know where somebody came from. Like if we identify that they came from Google Organic or something, we're going to set that timestamp and store it. So technically, this local storage key is something that we're generating through ListenLayer. Although this listener is called the native browser storage event, the native browser listener. You can target any browser storage activity, including browser storage activity that's set by ListenLayer. Anything outside of ListenLayer, we tend to consider and call native because it belongs more directly to your website and outside of the ListenLayer system. If you're unfamiliar with tracking user source, I'd recommend diving into the user source listener, which allows you to identify where people come from on your website over time, and you can store that information. So let's jump to our test website here. And we're going to put, notice we've cleared out our application storage. So we don't have a whole lot of information stored in here. And what we're expecting is that when we have this local storage key called screen1 VID and this user source first timestamp set over here, we're going to expect to see that written to the data layer or pushed to the data layer and written to the console. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add a GCL ID because I know that our user source listener is, at least based on the out-of-the-box settings, we'll be listening for a Google Click ID to identify that an individual is coming from Google Ads. We'll refresh this page. We'll see immediately we have a VID set, screen1 VID. We also have this user source first timestamp. So what ListenLayer has done here is it's identified that this person has come from Google Ads because of this GCL ID, and we've set this user source information. And immediately we can jump to our console and we can see we have two native local storage events. These were pushed into the data layer, but also written to the console. And we'll expand those so we can take a closer look at them. So this first one is the native local storage. And so it's coming from, it's this native local storage event. It's coming from this native local storage feature. And it'll then immediately tell us what is the native name, meaning the native name of the key or the cookie that we were targeting. And in this case, it's the user source first timestamp, which has been set in the browser. And if we drill down here, we can see what the actual timestamp was, and we can then do something with it. So there are obviously a lot of use cases for this, where you could, maybe we want to store this somewhere else, or maybe we want to increment something in another browser storage element. And so we need to get that into our data layer so we can do something with it, or perhaps we just want to set it or access it directly in Google Tag Manager, which is easier to do out of the data layer than out of local storage. Now notice there's a section in here for custom values. That is the custom data layer values feature, which would allow us to, for example, write a rule that would say, if a certain value exists here, then we want to push other values down here. And so those rules will then apply in real time. Now, there's another one, another native local storage here, which is going to be coming from this screen1 VID. So this is our native visitor ID that's being set by our own application here, for example. And we now know who this user is based on their ID within the application that we're looking at here. And so again, what the listener has done is it's targeted activity within that browser storage. And once it saw that change occur or that value set, it pushed that here into the data layer. There's a lot of really cool things you can do with this. It allows you to bridge the gap between what you're working on in ListenLayer and other applications that are storing information in your browser, or perhaps even a custom application that's running on your system or your website that you'd like to piggyback activity off of. So we hope you jump in and let us know if you have any questions.